Hello, everyone. So I would like to congratulate everyone for watching our first recorded video discussion about special education. So since we all know that our course this semester is Foundation of Special and Inclusive Education, so we will also be discussing about the inclusive education and its foundation. So, unsay kalahian sa SPED ug sa inclusive education and how are they connected with each other? So, if you're ready, or before you watch the whole discussion, I hope that you have already eaten your meal, you have your water beside you, your notebook for taking down important notes. So first is we have these definition and its importance. So what is inclusive education? How does it differ from SPED? Or unsay importance aning nga program? Second one is what are the main objectives of inclusive education and how are these certain principles and practices being integrated sa atoang inclusive education. Third is what are the advantages and disadvantages and inclusive language? What are the merits and demerits when pushing for inclusivity among persons with disabilities? And of course, what are the possible barriers of inclusive education? So I hope that again and again, before you watch this video, you have watched the first discussion, which is about the special education, so that it would be easier for you to explain what are their differences and how are they significant to the education of these people. Before we start in discussing the different principles and all, let us have first this quotation. When you judge someone based on a diagnosis, you missed out their abilities, beauty, and uniqueness. That is according to 70. In art term or in layman's term, mo-judge ko ng tag-isa ka tao sa kuan lang, sa findings lang, no? For example, the diagnosis of the certain child is dili siya kakita, and then you are judging him or her like you're predicting that that person will not be successful someday, is not a good person, or wala siya marating sa kinabuhi. Pero, the truth is, you missed out the abilities they have, unsay lang tinuod nga batasan, how are they being like or unsa sila ka useful society because of their uniqueness, because of their intelligence. So it is kuan necessary now. We have to be more extra careful in giving such comments about a certain person, or we should be more aware of the fact that people cannot be judged through the physical attitude lang, or again the physical appearance lang, or say ang diagnosis nga ato ang hibawan. But of course, we have to see to it that we are seeing that person not just physically pero sa iya ang deep connection sa imuha and sa society. So first, as to what I have said, we'll be discussing about its definition and its importance. What is inclusive education? So as if I will be going to ask you right now, what can you perceive if you will hear the phrase inclusive education? So I can predict, or I can say that some of you or most of you will always say that education is the only word that I have understood in your question, ma'am. So now let's define what is really inclusive education. The inclusive education class, it is a learning environment. Again, learning environment where children with and without disabilities are taught together as equals. So Umayantag special education. This is a program given or made by the government, established by the government and other people na involved ani para makatabang sa mga children with disabilities. Pero kung may inclusive education, from the word inclusive, from the word include pa yun, it is a learning environment. It is a place where all child are seen as equal or not different. So maski napa na siya disabilities, they are being taught together in this environment. For example, inside a classroom, na naisa ka teacher tapos he or she is teaching children with disabilities and na ay walay disability. So that is, or that can be called as an inclusive education. And also, this is an approach, no? That is more likely, dili pareha sa traditional approaches no, sa students, sa education of children with disabilities. So somewhat, you can say, more na siya na modernized because the government is doing such activities or actions that would help children with disabilities nga maka-cope up together with the students na walay disabilities. So that is inclusive education. Next is, it is another definition to help you fully understand what is really this phrase. Inclusive education daw, it is being recognized by teachers, families, and policymakers to be more beneficial. So, unsa siya nga pa maagi mahimong beneficial such students. It is an approach that ensures the children with and without disabilities ma-achieve nila ang gusto nila na ma-achieve sa tibok ng kinabuhi and ma-unleash ang ilang potential as students, pupils, or someone who have the goals or who has the goals and dreams in life. So it is beneficial in a way that it helps all children. Walay pili para ma-unleash ang ilang potential. So what is the main difference of a special education and the inclusive education? So let's discuss this. No, it is a very important topic and a very interesting one because we are talking about two contexts here in this course, and we are integrating these two contexts to be a more interesting one, a more helpful one, useful para makabalota if ever na tayo mga iani nga students sa atong classes. So say special education. Special education is really the it is a system or the system wherein kanang mga students or children with disabilities, they are provided formal education. They are provided formal education that is, of course, specially established in an institution. So, kaning special education, nana siya kana carefully or specially designed curriculum, and that curriculum will be useful and will be applicable sa mga students with special needs. Kaya mga students with special needs, these are the students na we can say that there are certain aspects sa ilang life na kulang nga naa sa imuha. So that is special education. Meanwhile, inclusive education, we're talking about the system in which both abled children and disabled, they are provided with formal education, no, together. So we can't say na kanang isa ka estudyante normal dayon kana siya is abnormal. We can say na that student has a disability, pero dili na to siya consider abnormal because you are all normal. And of course, everybody should have the right access to quality education and should have the right to receive fair and just treatment from the people around them, especially from the teachers. So that is the main difference of special education and inclusive education. So what's the importance of inclusive education? As you can see in the picture, see the able, not the label. So see how that person acts or whatsoever, unsaya mga narating, unsaya ang mga mabuhat sa society sa imong klase, dili ang label nga na siya disability or normal siya. Unsay importance sa inclusive education, we will be achieving the universalization. Kung ma-achieve the universalization, we are talking about unity. No, we are talking about people helping with each other. And we are talking about how that certain thing being unified, no, with the help of each other. So through the use of inclusive education, we can unite, we can help each other to provide a positive result or positive outcome for something. Second is for the development of healthy citizenship, no? We can develop healthy citizenship if ever na ay inclusive education, because the persons with disabilities can still cope up with mga nakahitabo karon and can still cope up with the things the normal people or the people nga walay disability ginabuhat every day. So healthy ang atong pagkuan every day kay silang mga tao naka-adjust na sila sa ato. Third is developing feeling of self-respect. Now, once that student na may disability, gi-include na to siya sa inclusive education, he or she will have that confidence. And of course, if everybody's respecting him or her, he or she will feel that he or she is being respected by the people around him. And of course, he or she will have the self-respect. For social equality, for self-reliance, na siya pagsalig sa iyang self, to enable children to stay with their families, and of course, to fulfill the constitutional responsibilities, to fulfill the responsibilities as citizens of this country. Those are the importance of inclusive education that we should remember always. Pinaka-kuan man yun, aim goal sa inclusive, of course, to give the students with disability and no disability nga equal education and maka-cope up with each other. Second one is objectives, principles, and practices. So what are the objectives of inclusive education? First is education for all. We have discussed this on our first module, education for all. It is very important nga naatay it is very important nga himo nilang objective, himo nilang kinahanglan nila ma-achieve ang education for all. No, kinahanglan atong main goal is na education for all ang atong country, and dapat na ng students regardless of unsa siya nga pagka-student naka-learn siya. Protection of rights. Inclusive education protects the rights of these students to improve quality education, because we don't know that that person who has the disability or who has a disability, mas bright pa dito siya itong ubang students, mas talented pa dito siya itong ubang students, mas gifted pa dito siya, and he or she can contribute to the quality education. So ma-improve na to ang quality sa education. As teachers, makita sad na to unsay atong kinahanglan i-change atong curriculum para malikayan na to nga kanang ginatawag na wala na cater ang tanang students. So para ma-improve ang quality sa education. Fourth is to develop social consciousness. It's very important that we or peace prevail on earth, and so that to develop social consciousness, we should be conscious that everyone around us are different. And of course, if we teachers will be teaching in our classroom, we will be expecting that our learners are different in some ways. So dapat conscious taan na. And of course, we can develop brotherhood through inclusive education. Your students or your pupils will be close with each other, will help with each other. So of course, it strengthens the brotherhood inside your classroom, and of course they can help with each other, no, in growth or whatsoever. Identification of skills, as to what I have said kanina, we can say that only the normal students or the students who have no disabilities kay mo ay talented. We don't know that these students with disabilities are more gifted than you. So of course, we or the inclusive education helps us to identify the skills they have. To prepare for new challenges, it is very important that, of course, as teachers and as students, we should be prepared for the new challenges we will be facing every day. So, kung na-inclusive education, and you can say that I have taught 10 students or peoples na na-IQAN, disability adding a year. So, whatever happens sa sunod na year, if ever naaman gani, kabalo na kung sa akong buhaton. And those can be considered as new challenges. And of course, we can prepare for that. So those are the objectives of inclusive education. Before we proceed, let us first review the different or the important points that I have discussed. So the main difference of SPED and inclusive education, special education, it is a system in which differently abled children are provided formal education, specially established institution with specially designed curriculum, or it is a program that provides help for the students with special needs. Kung may inclusive education, we're talking about providing formal education for both the students who have disabilities and who have no disabilities. Kung may importance, inclusive education will help us in achieving the universalization. Of course, for the development of healthy citizenship, developing self-respect, for social equality, for self-reliance, for, of course, to enable children to stay with their families, and to fulfill the constitutional responsibilities. Pasabot rin to stay with their families. There are institutions, manggod, na dito nila stay ang students nga na disability so that it would be easier for them to reach out to these children. Sa nato i-discuss nato sa atong SPED. Pero since na natin sa inclusive education, we are including them in our classroom, in our day-to-day class. So for the objectives of inclusive education, we have here, first and foremost, education for all, protection of rights, to improve quality of education, develop of social consciousness, development of brotherhood, of course, identification of skills, and to prepare for new challenges. So what are the principles nga naglay or unsay nga principles ang nabilong sa inclusive education? Of course, we have these principles. Principle number 1, no discrimination with students, as students should be treated equally, fairly, and justly by the teachers and the people around them. So walay discrimination dapat mahitabo inside the classroom. Teachers are the role model of the society. So we teachers should, of course, kitang dapat dili mag-ulo-ulo o mga bullying or discrimination inside our classroom. I have tried, or I have kanang met this teacher when I was in elementary, that he constantly, he is constantly discriminating some of my classmates just because they are poor and can't afford this certain contribution inside our class. So it would be difficult for the students na to cope up with unsay mong gusto mahitabo. And of course, you didn't know the situation of your students in their homes. That is why, di ba, giingon sa ato ang klase sa una sa child and adolescent na and sa atong edtech na when you will be teaching inside the classroom, you should know first daw the situation of your students, the family background, from what culture or religion they came from, and unsay ilang differences, unsay ilang interests, unsay ilang needs. So that is why walay discrimination nga mahitabo sa imong mga students. Next is equal educational opportunity to all. It is still being mentioned from our previous discussion that every child should have the right to be educated or to have the access to quality education. So, ang principle niya nga second, sa inclusive, the same suspend nga dapat na equal education opportunity to all students with and without disabilities. Third is school adapt to the needs of students and of course teachers. No, we have to adapt with the needs of the students kay we can't di man ta ka adjust or di man ta kabalog unsay ato mga panggamiton nga materials or mga assessment tools inside our classroom if we do not know what are the needs of the students literally ug unsay lang needs, like for example kani siya nga student kay na siya ADHD unsay mga angay buhaton, kani siya nga student deaf mute unsay mga angay buhaton. Next is equal educational benefits for all students. The same, it's actually connected with the second principle. Equal educational benefit, dapat ng student maka-benefit. Fifth is the students' views are listened to and taken seriously. It is necessary that you should not be a one-sided person. You should know how to accept criticisms, or you should know how to accept ideas from other people around you, especially if these people are your students. So, sa ilang mga comments, sa ilang mga views, that's why natay ka ng question and answer after sa itong discussion, dapat imong paminawon and dapat imo siyang i-take seriously. Next principle, individual differences between students are a source of richness and diversity. Guys, again and again, when you enter a classroom, you will be meeting diverse learners. So these learners came from different backgrounds, traditions, culture, religions. They have different interests and needs. So it is not a problem because teachers are considered as resourceful, flexible, and of course, responsible aning butanga. So remember that ang individual differences among students, it is a source of richness. You will be getting or you will learn a lot from their differences. You will be able to adapt and be more flexible if, of course, makita niyo ng mga students na lahi-lahi siya, na-use sila yung differences. Sumot na face-to-face, the teacher will have a great adjustment sa inyo, ha? So, if kamo teachers, it is not a problem. Take it as your challenge as a teacher. Nga imong mga student na ibagalaban, na ibuutan, na dili mo sulod og klase, na dugay mo pass og requirements. Unsa pa na dira? So, mana siya. Next is, there are different, so those are the principles of inclusive education that we should remember, especially if and only if makatudlo ta og institutions nga or place nga daghan yung mga students nga na disability. So what are the practices? The practices, these are the things of developing inclusive education. There's mga practices of inclusive education. First, understanding inclusion as a continuing process, not a one-time event, as it is equal to learning is lifelong, or we have this lifelong learning. Teaching is a lifelong learning. So understanding inclusion as a continuing process. So if we are able to understand that in having this inclusive education, we should also be reminded that it is a continuous process. So forever na siya, because we don't know na ana nga place na agyoy mga gipanganak nga na disability, and we have no power ma-stop na. Instead, we should not see it as a one-time event. Like for example, imang ibutang sa imo ang karon. Karon tuig gara ko mangingani kinaka mga students kay ngani sunod tuig lahi na ko maglahi na ko upang maagi. Nya sunod tuig kay napaday gyapon kay mga students nga ingana. What are you going to do? So dapat you are able to understand that not all students are like this and like that. Strengthening and sustaining the participation of all students, teachers, parents, and community members in the work of the school. That is why it is being said that the stakeholders in education are the very important people in sustaining or in strengthening education. So, sa inclusive education pa lang daan, ato na dapat i-practice ang atong gitawag nga strengthening and sustaining the participation of all students. Dapat walay favoritism, like katura siya nga bata kung tawagon sa akong klase unya kay maayo to siya mo answer, dili ko magtawag adtong bungol kay maglisod ko pangutana adto. So as teachers, dapat we were able to be flexible inside our class. Third is restructuring the cultures, policies, and practices in schools to respond. Okay, this is when, for example, in that certain community, pupils came from different cultures and practices sa ilang balay. So of course, mo adjust pud ang school or ikaw. So you will be restructuring the cultures, you will be restructuring the policies and the practices nga inyong ginabuhat sa schools to, of course, to cater the needs of these diverse peoples within their locality. Providing an accessible curriculum and appropriate training programs for all teachers and students. Di ba, giingon man to gapon natay isa ka law nga I think it is 5250. You can just browse it. The teacher should be given a 10-year training program para mas makabalo pa sila unsan pag-deal ng mga ingani nga students. But sa atong part, we will just be to 4 years. Bito na ingani nga course for you to be able to understand and comprehend, internalize, ug unsa ta mga kinahanglan ni remember if na may mga students ngani puhon. Dapat accessible ang curriculum sa aning mga students, and of course with appropriate training programs, both na lahat teacher and students. Next is identifying and providing support for staff as well as students. Third, we are now on the advantages, disadvantages, and language guidelines. So of course, we have the advantages. What's the advantages sa inclusive education? First is children learn significant academic skill, of course. Children develop a positive understanding of themselves and others since they are being together inside the classroom. They will be able to cope up with the differences and of course ug unsay trend sa nowadays. And they can develop friendship. All children learn by being together. They can share their feeling and of course they can learn new set of skills. Everyone is granted an equal education and everyone develop skills or social skills through consistent social interactions. Ganun consistent because they will be seeing their classmates, their teachers every day. since na sila sa isa ka environment, learning environment. Those are main disadvantages. Ang disadvantages lang yun sa inclusive education, the children with disabilities may show disruptive behaviors, especially katong na mga ADHD, unsa pa na inside the klase, tapos you as the teacher has the very ubos nga pasensya nga nga mga students. So it would be difficult for you to adjust with the situation. Samot na if first time niyo magtudloan ang adapit, and you will be encountering a lot of children with disabilities. So nagi ng disruptive behaviors, maka-disrupt sa maka-disturb sa ibang klase, and kung easily distracted ka, dali ka ma-distract as a teacher. Cases of bullying rather, it is a very common kung na students mo eskwelahan nga school na sila disability, tapos na ay mga students nga hilig mang bully. So dili gyud nato ni siya malikayan nga na cases of bullying. Third, the teacher may tend to become impatient towards a disabled child. Mo bito nang gitawag og na 10-year training program because we are being taught ana nga mga panahon unsaon pag-deal, unsaon pagkahimong patient anis nila nga mga bata. Pero kung ikaw nga ubos ra og patience, no, you will tend to develop the what we call impatience kung magkuan ka og mag-deal ka og children with disabilities. Mo na siya kanang one of the disadvantages kung i-appeal na to sila sa classroom. Naay ba mga students nga magbalik-balik og istorya, like kanang naay mga autistic nga mga students, and then kung imong balik-balikon ng istorya kadugayan malagot ni noon sila, so maglabay-labay na sila yung then naay mga students nga mohilak mag-away din mohilak sa imong classroom, and maski imong pahilomon dili hilom or whatever. Fourth is the teacher has to slow down to teach the disabled child, thus creating boredom among the students. So, of course, kung na kay student dira nga na disability, tapos dugay siya makaget sa mga lesson, then di ba it is our responsibility nga no one should be left behind. So you have to teach this child in a slower pa dyan na way. So it would create dili na wala na interest ang mga students uban nga maminaw sa imuha, and of course maboard na sila sa imuha. So mo na nakaapan kung naay children with disabilities atos lang iipon sa mga students nga walay disabilities inside a classroom. Those are the disadvantages and advantages of inclusive education. So what is the inclusive language nga kinahanglan nato i-avoid or timan-an kung mag-teach tawag students nga naay disability? First, language guidelines. We have the collective terms and labels nga appropriate anang students nga naay disabilities. You should know that we should be always positive inside our classroom, dili tag mag-negative inside our classroom samot na mga bata nga disabilities. And everyday phrases. So these phrases are being used every day, lalo na sa katong mga batang na disabilities. And for you, it is nakakaumay or masumhan kadugayan. But of course, we are having the goal of teaching these students and of course to help them learn easily. So balik-balik yun na siya. And of course, na mga guidelines, na mga guides, na mga dapat nimong sundon para ang mga butanga. So what are the words to use and to avoid? First is we have to avoid passive or victim ng words. This would make them feel na they are so unlucky. Use language that respects disabled people as active individuals. No, do not use the words nga makafeel sila og dili sila important sa society, wala sila gamit sa society, or whatsoever. And tips on behavior, what to watch out for when speaking with persons. Guys, sa maski wala pa lang gani ka ng disability, you should be able to watch out or lang tawadaan or paminawa ang imong self before ka masura. You should know how to think first, critically think first before speaking out. No? Okay. Hindi pwede nga mamalikas ka sa mong student tapos kato siya iyan dala-dala niniguli niya. Then if ma-feel din niya nga wala ko'y gamit ng pagka-student, something like that. So the collective terms and labels, example, the word disabled is a description, not a group of people. So use disabled people to kuno, not disabled as the collective term. So kung mayon tagdinaghan, use the phrase disabled people. However, daghan daw ko ng mga deaf whose first language is BSL. Consider themselves part of the deaf community. So pwede na to sila i-describe as deaf. Or pwede nila i-describe ilang mga kaugalingon as deaf. Pero dapat capital letter D to emphasize na they are deaf. Okay? Okay. Avoid medical labels, especially that kung naana ka sa community, naana ka sa classroom. Okay? Kaya dili ka nurse, dili ka doctor. They say little about people as individuals and tend to reinforce stereotypes of disabled people. So dili ka kung may mga medical labels, kung nana ka dira sa hospital, they will tend to stereotype or generalize that you are the patients or unwell mo. So pwede dili nimo na siya gamiton inside the classroom. Dapat yun mo sila tawagon ng mga pasyente. Okay? No, dapat magpabili na natong respect ani nila nga mga people. Next, do not automatically refer to disabled people in all communications. So magbantay tani dili ta pwede magamit og disabled people sa tanan natong chika. Because many people who need disability benefits and services don't identify with this term. Consider using people with health conditions or impairment because guys, kung may mga disabled people, these are people na one part of their body cannot move or cannot function well. So, kung mga people with certain health conditions sa nabilong sa PWDs, dili sila tanan pungkol, dili sila tanan walay kuan ngana because there are certain conditions nga matawag yapon nato sila people with impairment. So instead nga mo chika ka og disabled people as your collective term, in all your chika pwede ka mo gamit og people with health conditions or impairments because it is more appropriate than using the phrase disabled people. Okay, next, positive, not negative. Focus on the person first. According to the picture that we are seeing right now, it is wrong to say that John is mentally ill. And it is right to say John has a mental health condition. Because John is more than his disability. Dapat dili siya mapilti sa iyang disability, no? John has a mental health condition. Nga na lang ang pagkachika, dili na kaya literal ng mentally ill. Dili na mo pwede nun nga buang si John. Okay? Avoid phrases like suffer from. Dili pwede nga mayon kag suffer from. Kaya pwede na siya maka-create of discomfort. Masakitan ang isa ka tao and ma-hopeless siya. Feel niya nga, wala na siguro po ikaugmaan nga. Okay? Wheelchairs users may not view themselves as a confined. Dili tanang panahon nga mas kung naka-wheelchair ng isa ka tao, na-confine siya, na siya sakit or whatsoever because it is their way of transporting themselves from one place to another. Kuan siya. Try thinking of it as a mobility aid. So, sa ito everyday phrases nga dapat gamiton. Most disabled people are comfortable with the words used to describe daily living. So, kanang mga nag-wheelchair, dili na sila mga patient tanan, pero they go for walks, naglaag lang sila. And people with visual impairments, they are very pleased or dili nga makita ka. So, mana siya. The common phrases that may associate impairments, for example, deaf to our pleas or blind drunk. This should be avoided because these gave another meaning sa ubang tao. So magbantay ta sa ato mga ginagamit nga phrase everyday, lalo na if we will be facing these people. So these are examples of words to avoid and use. Okay? So, word to avoid, the handicapped or disabled. Pero kung collective, disabled people lang yung gamiton. Pero kung sa all communication, pwede ka magamit of people with health conditions or people with impairments. Avoid afflicted by, suffers from, victim of. Kay kung imo na siyang iingon ng afflicted by, suffers from, victim of, makaroon na sila they are being makaroon na silang hopeless na kayo sila or makaingon silang helpless na kayo sila kay feel nila grabe na gid siguro kasakit ang ilaang ka-severe rather ang ilaang sakit or ang ilang condition kay ginaingon nimo na siya. Pwede ka mo gamit og has, name sa condition or impairment. Avoid confined to a wheelchair because again, kadang naka-wheelchair, dili tanan naka-confine sa hospital or naisakit because this is their way of mobilizing or moving themselves from one place to another. Avoid mentally handicapped, mentally defective, retarded, o subnormal, kay sakit ra kay siya paminawon. Or medyo kung kay siya paminawon offensive, you can use the with a learning disability, plural, singular rather, or with learning disabilities, plural, or na mental health condition. Avoid using cripple or invalid but use disabled person. Avoid using spastic but use person with cerebral palsy. Avoid using able-bodied. Pwede ka magamit og non-disabled. Kay grabe na pud kay ning able-bodied lagi kabalo man ta kana siya kay kuan walay disability. So, dapat non-disabled datong gamiton. Okay, same man siya. Do not use deaf and dumb or deaf mute. Well, we can use deaf mute sa uban pero it is somewhat offensive and we can use na lang deaf and someone nga na hearing impairment. Do not use the word blind directly. Use people with visual impairments, blind people, blind partially sighted people. Do not use epileptic, diabetic, depressive because we can use person with epilepsy, person with diabetes or diabetes, person with depression or someone nga nga sakit. Do not use the word dwarf kung mo describe ka sa isa ka tao nga unano, di ba? Do not use the word midget. Instead, use the phrase someone with restricted growth or short nature. Dili ra kay siya sakit paminawon. Do not use fits, spells, or attacks because the correct term for that is seizures. And na may makabantay man mo kalit lang o ka ng kirig or whatsoever. Nana sila Tourette. Kaya sila mga tao na sila Tourette, mukalit lang sila og ka ng basta you can kalitag ka ng kung sa inyo apang term. One of my students have said mukalit lang daw kirig. So mga sila, na sila seizures. And most of them have Tourette's or Tourette. Tips on behavior. Use a normal tone of voice, no? Normal tone. Dili ka mo singgit, dili po tone sa yung voice nga naluoy sa ka sa student because stop being like murag gipitihan ni mo siya, naluoy ka sa imo ka, iyaha rather because makalaw na siya nga luoy ra kayo siya nga pagkatao. Yan na siya ingani. Do not be too precious or too politically correct because being super sensitive to the right and wrong language and depiction will stop you from doing anything. Never attempt to speak or finish a sentence for the person you are talking to. It is a very disrespectful kanang act nga wala pa ganing nahuman ang isa ka tawag istorya. ikaw na mo ga-speak or ga-finish sayang sentence kay gusto ay istorya. Maybe because basin lahi ang inyong ideas na dili na noon siya ganahan mo padayon kay giunhan mo siya. Address disabled people in the same way as you talk. Do not see them as different from other people. So we should treat anyone fairly, justly, and equally. Speak directly to the disabled person if maski na sila interpreter kay maka-feel sila nga out of place sila. So kung may nga ang disabled person or may nga interpreter nga di siya makasabot ana, so ako lalay istoryahay, okay ra. Pero dili ka pwede nga moderate ka sa interpreter or sa iyang kauban because it is a disrespectful nga act. So last is the barriers of inclusive education. So say barriers in inclusive education. Negative approach. There are some teachers manggod nga maski inclusive education na nanad sila sa formal education nga ang mga students regular na negative ang ilang pag-approach ani, and of course matrigger ang angay nga matrigger ani or unsay matrigger ani nga mga students or lain na ang ilang ma-feel, diba? Lack of physical facilities, lisod kaayo nga ga-teach kag students with disabilities tapos lack yung imong school or ang yung institution og mga physical facilities. Lack of funds is very difficult nga mag-teach ka din nila tapos lack of funds because mas dako ang ilang needs sa imong mga regular nga students. Lack of trained teachers. So, mas importante gyud ba nga trained ang teachers nga mo teach ani nila nga mga students because he or she can be able to adjust with the situation or the future nga mahitabo direct easily. Social discrimination, emotional problems, educational problems. So these are the barriers of inclusive education or kanang i-appeal na to ang mga students with disabilities sulod sa regular classroom. So na makabantay mo ng mga students with disabilities na maingon nga mga teacher or mga students mo bully nga ibalhin na lang naglaig eskwelahan ng inyong anak ka ng eskwelahan para niya. Diba? So, makaingon ta nga barrier yun siya. It would be difficult for us to administer our class if and only if nangahitabo ni sila tanan. So, I hope that you have understood everything about inclusive education. If you forgot what is this all about and such, please don't hesitate to, of course, rewatch the video about special education and this inclusive education discussion, recorded video discussion. And before I say or bid my goodbye to everybody who are watching right now, I want to let you remember this quotation that in an effective classroom, students should not only know what they're doing, but of course they should know or they should also know why and how. So that's all for today. I hope that you have understood everything. So please do not hesitate to ask if you have questions.